Future's now, old man.
What it do, best ballin' for you. This is Future First Podcast, where we help you win today with a future first mindset. I'm your co-host J-Mac here without my normal co-host Jose. Instead, we have a very special guest, John Leonard. What's up, John? How you doing, man?
What's up, J-Mac? Good to be here. Nice to get on the other side of the pod for a little bit.
Glad to have you, man. You look good. You sound good. Tonight, we're going to talk about some Dynasty Bestball. You know, it's the summertime. Best ball is all the rave right now, but Dynasty Bestball doesn't get a whole lot of love. So Jose and I had the idea to turn July into Best Ballin'. We're going to talk about Dynasty Bestball all of July to give it the attention it deserves because it is truly a great format. And John, just from chopping it up with you in Discord, I can tell, man, you got a sharp mind for the Dynasty Bestball. So tell us a little bit about yourself, man. Who you are, how long you've been playing Dynasty, how long you've been doing Best Ball Dynasty. Give us a little taste of this.
Yeah, man. Thanks. So I got my start on fantasy football like 15 something years ago, maybe a little bit more, 20 years ago. Probably way too long, but we don't need to talk about that. Been doing Dynasty for more like 6 years. Got a good mix of leagues. I basically split half and half between lineup and best ball. I like to get a good variety. None of my leagues have the same scoring format, roster, any of that stuff. So like keeping it fresh. And started getting into data because I had questions and I wanted to figure out the answers. And so I started digging around. Got a nice little database, all the NFL plays, past decade or so, started digging into it.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, I appreciate all the data you've been putting down. We met in the OTC Discord and you were dropping all the sweet graphs that I love to see and the charts and so many cool things over there. Where can people find those, by the way?
Yeah, I tend to drop them there. I'm also in the Superflex Super Show Discord, a couple others, and you can find me on Blue Sky. Just at my name, John Leonard, bluesky.social, I think it is, whatever Blue Sky does. Dropping data, charts, tables, all kinds of stuff. Hopefully it's actionable, right? That's the idea.
Very actionable. Yeah, no, it's a lot of good data, and sometimes too much data can be a bad thing, but even if it doesn't come to be useful, like you said, you have a question, you set out to find an answer, and maybe that answer isn't clear, but you have a better understanding of it at the very least when you get to the end of it. So I tend to think too much data is never a bad thing. Sometimes there's a little bit too much noise in it all, but I like what you've been putting out there, and it's been really great stuff. So I'll drop a link to your Blue Sky in the description here for the pod and for the video so people can get into that. But I'm glad to have you on, John. Let's talk about some Dynasty Bestball. But first, we're going to take care of a few things here. If you're looking for a roster review, go ahead and hit us up at futurefirstpod@gmail.com. We will get you hooked up with all the information you need so that you guys can crush your Dynasty leagues from now and into the future. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to touch down on that like button, go for 2 and subscribe. Drop a comment while you're there. We really love engaging with all of you. And if you're catching this episode on the Player Profiler Network, don't forget to follow us directly so you can see all of our content. We have our Process First podcast coming out with new episodes every Saturday where we are breaking down a startup draft manager by manager, going through each one of their processes. And that's been a lot of fun. We just had our boy Keegan come on. So he was the creator of the OTC. So you can go see his is the latest one to drop. and he has some good content there. So other than that, one other thing I wanted to shout out, with the hype of the Dynasty Bestball in July, at the end of July, we're going to run as many startups as we can fill. So if you guys want to get into a Dynasty Bestball startup, if we are sparking some joy talking about this for you, make sure to drop a comment in here or send us an email at futurefirstpod.com or gmail.com and let us know that you want in, and we will get you hooked up and plugged in to one of those startups. And last but not least, shout out to Fox, who's been helping us with all our graphics. She's always killing it. Nailed that last thumbnail with Bucky Irving and the landmine. So good. Follow her on X at bfoxworth07. Other than that, John, before we get into the Dynasty Best Ball fundamentals here, we're going to take a little bit of a quick hit, man. You ready?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. All right, for tonight's quick hit, let's talk a little bit about Brandon Aiyuk. He's been in the news quite a bit lately. I'm curious to know what you think of everything going down. I have a little bit going on in my head of what I think is happening. I'm just going to lead us off here. As a 49er fan, I know how they tend to handle things, and I feel like I have a pretty good sense of what Brandon Aiyuk is doing, and I have a theory of what's going on here. I think Brandon Aiyuk is being a little crazy, a little out there on the socials. I think he doesn't want to be traded. I think he wants to be released so that he can go sign with the Commanders. So rather than drag his name through the mud and do some stuff that is illegal and frowned upon or whatever, he's just doing socially abnormal things. So that everyone's out here just kind of ragging on him, being like, what's wrong with Aiyuk? I don't think anything is going on with him. He knows the Niners aren't going to trade him, or they want to trade him, and they're not going to release him. They can't keep him. If they keep him past the September 1st date, they owe him $23 million in option bonuses. So he has to be off that roster by then, unless they want to pay him that or they want to trade him. And if they trade him, whoever trades for him has to carry that roster option bonus through. So not only do you have to pay him $23 million, but then you probably have to sign him to a contract to stay on the team. So I don't think anybody's trading for him, and that he's making sure of that. And then outside of that, I think he wants to play for the Commanders. He's letting that be well known. Shoot, man, he might even be practicing with Jaden Daniels. I don't think that's outside of the realm of possibility. He's already getting some reps in secret in some sort of indoor facility doing something. I don't know. I'm not going that far. I'm not gonna get all crazy and put on my tinfoil hat here for you guys, but that's my perspective on it. And I feel like I have, not necessarily an outsider's perspective as many people might think. But John, how are you breaking down this whole Brandon Aiyuk situation? Are you in? Are you out? Are you buying? Are you selling? Where are you at with it?
I'm definitely in the zero shares, zero cares club on this one. So I do not have to worry about him too much. But, I don't even know that they can trade him, right? He's on the reserve left squad list. Right? He has to actually show up and sign something to return to the team. So I think he is just gone. And he's posting things on social, talking about signing with the Commanders. That can't happen until he's released. He's throwing money in a closet. No idea what he's up to. Kittle's saying good luck with that. The guy's kind of out of his mind, according to folks that know more than I do. So yeah, I'm not in the habit of buying headaches. So I think I'm going to just let him be. And just, good luck, man.
I tend to agree. I'm not buying. I don't really have any shares. I think I got rid of my last share last season, sold on the hope of him coming back from that injury. And yeah, man, it doesn't look good for the outlook for him. But let's say, because I'm curious, let's say he signs with the Commanders in September, right? Let's say this happens early season, maybe even after the season starts, right? where do you think he should be valued in terms of dynasty value? I mean, we can equate it to picks, we can equate it to a player. You can approach this any way you want because I'm kind of throwing it at you here. But where do you think he should be going in terms of his value?
Yeah, I mean, if he's on the field and in shape, and he's neither of those, but if he were, right, then we got to think that 27 class is coming up. That class is going to be stellar, right? There's a problem with that. Trying to equate him there. Maybe an early 2 at best, but realistically, I'm not touching that. You know, maybe a late 2 is where I would start to think about it being okay. But when was the last time he was on the field, right? Is he anywhere close to shape? You know, he can drive fast. Can he run fast?
Nice. No, I tend to agree, right? And this all kind of came up because I had a trade offer come into me, and it was Brandon Aiyuk, and the other piece, I can't remember exactly who it was, but they wanted Freiermuth. I think it was Brandon Aiyuk and Caleb Johnson, and they wanted Freiermuth and another late round asset. And it was Jalen Naylor. They wanted Freiermuth and Jalen Naylor. And I'm a rebuilding team with Freiermuth and Jalen Naylor. No, sorry, back up. This was not Freiermuth. It was Njoku. I had Njoku and Naylor, and they wanted to give me Aiyuk and Caleb Johnson. And I'm sitting here thinking, since I'm a rebuilder, as a value flip, which side of this trade has the better value flip? And that's what came up. It's like, Brandon Aiyuk is obviously the most volatile asset in that trade. And I was just curious, like, if he does sign with the Commanders, immediately, what could I get for him without seeing him play football, without anything? Could I get a second for him? Because if I could get a second for him, then I feel like I could probably make back more than what I would be able to get for Naylor or Njoku in this kind of, I think it was a 0.75 tight end premium. So that's just what was going through my head. I just wanted to hash that out here on air because I hadn't had time to kind of vocalize all this. But you think a second is probably the best I could do?
Yeah, I wouldn't go more than that. That guy's got too many problems off the field, on the field, don't know what's going on, don't know what shape he's in. I mean, I was looking at some data earlier on, you know, receivers in motion, all kinds of things like that, EPA effect. And, you know, he's up in the top right. He's looking really good when he was on the field. He's not on the field. I don't know when he's going to be on the field. So, you know, I'm not buying it at that, even at the second, not selling it. I just don't want it.
You know, in two, when you mentioned, you know, that EPA, playing for Kyle Shanahan, it's an extremely efficient offense. And, you know, it doesn't really matter who the person is that's getting targeted. It's just more so that they're getting targeted. You know, I think especially in Kyle Shanahan's offense, we saw with Jake Tongas last year stepping up, and we've seen it from time and time again. Just, I mean, even blanking on the wide receiver 3 that had a pretty big season with them last year, but he stepped up.
Jennings.
No, it wasn't Jennings. It was the guy who played for the Patriots for a long time. Came over.
Kendrick Bourne.
Thank you. Kendrick Bourne had a couple big games with him, and it's just, that's what the Niners offense does, is they set the plays up through play action, and then they take the big chunk plays because they know they can get them. As soon as Brock Purdy gets the look that he wants, he knows who's going to be open. He makes the throw. So that's another thing that we need to think about here is, how good is Brandon Aiyuk going to be outside of this 49ers offense? We saw Debo go over to this Washington Commanders offense, if that's where Brandon Aiyuk ends up. Obviously, Debo and Brandon Aiyuk are a little bit different play style of a receiver. And Debo had a decent season by the all stretch of things, but he wasn't exactly playing with a healthy offense either. So it's interesting. I tend to agree with you. I'm just out in general. And I think we've said enough about Brandon Aiyuk. He's stolen enough minutes of our airtime here. What do you say? Let's take a break here and hear from the Podfather, and then let's move on to talk about some Dynasty Best Ball fundamentals.
If you play in Dynasty, you need Dynasty Deluxe, our premium package for Dynasty Leaguers. We rank over 300 players, updated every week, all year long. And there's a win now mode and a rebuild mode with Superflex and tight end premium controls. And a Dynasty League sync where you can say, sync down all of my sleeper teams, all my FFPC teams. And then you can browse around your leagues for who has needs. And then you can use our trade finder to see what kinds of trades are happening in leagues that are similar to the one I want to do. Then you can analyze trades using our trade analyzer, which balances the lifetime value, which includes pick values out to like 2028. All of that plus the rookie guide, $25 value is included. So if you're just in one Dynasty League, Dynasty Deluxe is well worth it. And use your host's promo code, and you can bump up to all in and get $25 off.
All right, welcome in to the main segment here, Dynasty Best Ball fundamentals. Let's get into it, John. I think for anybody out there who's never played a Best Ball Dynasty before, maybe they don't even know what it is. And I think it'd be good just to kind of lay down the very basics of what it is here and what they can expect to be different from a normal Dynasty league. So do you want to tackle this first question here? You know, what is a Best Ball Dynasty at its core core?
Yeah, thanks. So, I mean, when it comes down to it, it's still your same basic roster, same bench, things like that. But we're taking lineup out of the equation. No more sitting there figuring out who to start, who to sit, any of that. And it all optimizes it for you, right? No big deal. Everything's good to go. You still got your head-to-head. You're still making trades, still making waivers. But that big piece there where you don't have to set your lineup means that all your bench players are coming. They have a chance to make a real difference on your team, right?
Yeah, 100%. It's that one small change. And I think that anybody who's thinks of the word best ball, if you're playing Dynasty, you should know the word best ball and what that means, right? And, you know, not having to set your lineup, and your optimal starting lineup is always set for you. So because of that, like you're saying, your bench becomes your starting lineup or an opportunity for your starting lineup. Your bench roster spots are opportunities for points. And so because of that, you have to optimize every single roster spot, because when that is an opportunity for points, that's an opportunity for you to win every single week. How many times in a lineup league did you have like the wide receiver 3 for the Cowboys and he just popped off for 25 points, but you never got to capture any of those points? Because why? Why would you go start that guy when you had, you know, Jordan Addison, the wide receiver 2? You know, like there's no reason to start a Flournoy, you know, if you will. But in a best ball league, you don't have to make that decision. If you had Flournoy on your team, you got to capture that 25-point game. So having that aspect of not having to set your lineup changes everything that you know about a Dynasty league. And we're going to kind of get into that a little bit more here. Let's talk about the fundamentals that are built around that key difference here that will kind of define how the Dynasty Best Ball should be played, or at least, you know, in the most efficient manner. So I'm going to jump into our presentation mode here, and we're going to open up our slideshow with the Dynasty Best Ball fundamentals. And then we're going to get into the first one here, which is embrace variance, which should make a ton of sense. Again, if you know anything about best ball, or even just what we were saying, variance, the boom bust profiles, not knowing when they're going to have a big game. Maybe not even that. Maybe it's just they're getting snaps And maybe you're not even expecting these guys to score points, but you know they're going to be on the field. And if they can catch 3 balls and put up 45 yards in a deep enough best ball league, that might actually enter your lineup. And you might need to capture that, because you never know when your stud guy is going to, bust for a week, and you need to replace that guy with whatever you can get. I remember, is it Ty Johnson? I think the backup running back for the Bills. That guy in a best ball league is great, man. Like, he'll get a random touchdown and catch a couple balls, and all of a sudden he's got 10 points in a PPR league, and you're like, let's go. Like, I like this guy. So let's talk about this a little bit more, man. Like, in a Dynasty Best Ball league, how are you embracing variance here?
So I think you said it, right? It's not just about the opportunities, but it's the volume. It's figuring out who's going to have that opportunity to go off for that 20-point week, right? Who's going to get that long bomb touchdown? It's going to get that big score, and suddenly they're in your lineup. What I like to do, though, is balance that out a little bit. I want to make sure that I've got some stable floor with my spike guys.
Yeah.
But that's up to you, right? But I like to have a little bit of consistency and then go over the top with your Jameson Williams, your Christian Watsons, right? Those guys that are going to go off for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns here and there, right? Get those spikes and win your weeks. And if they do kind of bomb out, it doesn't matter, because you got 10 other guys there to fill right in.
Yeah, no, that's a great way to put it. Like, I think if we were to compare this to like a regular dynasty league, pairing that type of player with maybe like a Wan'Dale Robinson, right, where they're not going to get crazy amounts of yardage, but they are going to put points on the board through just catches, right? So they have a really safe floor, but not a high ceiling. And then you pair him with a guy like you're saying, who's going to go off for 2 touchdowns and 90 yards, something like that. That's the equivalent in like a regular dynasty league of rostering like a CD Lamb or like a Justin Jefferson. You're just Frankensteining it with a couple players, right? Obviously, it takes two or three bench spots to kind of make that player come together. But we can do that in best ball because we don't have to choose to start one of them. We get the opportunity for any one of those 3 to enter the lineup on each week, right? So I think embracing variance is kind of pursuing spike weeks and building around them, like you're saying, right? Having those high variance players on your team, but then also balancing them out with something that has a safer floor that you can ensure you're not going to get a 0 for that week, but have the opportunity to get that high boom game from them. And I think the best way to do that is you assign number of starts to players. And this is something that I take from Scott Connor. If you're not following Scott Connor, what are you doing? Follow him immediately. He's Charles Chill, FFB, on pretty much any platform, I'm pretty sure. But what he does is he takes them, he looks at their spike weeks, goes through their profile, looks at, okay, how many times did this guy score 10 plus points in a season? Okay, player X scored 10 plus points 3 times last season. That means this guy's going to hit my time, my roster about 3 times every season. That's 3 starts. And when you equate it to starts, you have to kind of give yourself a target number to hit. And so how he does that is, okay, I play in a league where I start 2 wide receivers every week. There's 14-week seasons, not including playoffs. So 2 wide receivers times 14 weeks is 28 wide receiver starts. So if I have one player that's going to hit my lineup roughly 3 times in a season, now I need X amount of players now to get in 25 wide receiver starts. So that's kind of how he looks at this, right? He starts breaking it down by taking players, figuring out how many times that guy can enter my lineup. Obviously, this isn't a perfect system. We don't know what week they're going to enter our lineup. We can't plan for this player to enter my lineup this week and this player to enter my lineup next week. So there's going to be overlap when they do, but this is the best we can do. If you build into that and plan for more than starts than you need, then you're golden. Obviously, when you have a guy like a stud, like Jamar Chase, you can pretty much just lock him in for 14 starts, right? That's the benefit of having a Jamar Chase on your team, is now you need less starts from everyone else. Do you kind of see things similarly, or how do you kind of go around pursuing the spike weeks and building around them? Is that what you do when you build your rosters?
Yeah, for sure. And kind of like the way that I like to think about it with those spikes is almost if you think about like a sine wave, right? So you got that peaks and valleys that keep going across, and then you can kind of overlap that. So if you've got a couple of different players and they've each got their own sine waves, as they start to stagger, and then you'll see those peaks are kind of covered by all of them, right, as you go across. And so that's my lineup at the top there. So I'm trying to maintain that straight line at the top across all those different sine waves that are kind of keeping me going.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's a good comparison. I followed that with my math brain. I'm totally there with you. I wish I had a visual for all those language art majors out there, but hopefully you guys know what the sine wave looks like, and you can kind of draw that. But I do love that. Let's talk about why the boom bust profiles are kind of gold, more so in a best ball league here. And I mean, it's exactly what we're talking about, right? We're pursuing the spike weeks here. But because these boom bust profiles are kind of more desirable here than they would be in a regular lineup league, I think the result is that you have more relevant players in a dynasty league. And since you have more relevant players, it leads to a larger trade market and more diverse builds, which we're going to get into roster construction here at the end. So stay tuned. We'll dive more into that. But that's honestly probably one of my favorite things about Best Ball Dynasty is just how lucrative the trade market is. Like you're always able to approach someone and be able to make a trade. And thirds, fourths, fab has never mattered more in any other league than like a best ball league, because it's like, hey, like I got a quarterback that's hurt this week and I just need one start. I just need him to get in there, and I don't care that it's super gross and like a Mike Jones getting in there. Like I don't have to choose to start him if he booms because he's got a good matchup. Awesome. If not, maybe I have another quarterback on my bench that can kind of make up that. So you don't have to commit to them, I think is why it is. Do you find this kind of the same way? Do you find like your trade markets are a little more loose and the wheels are greased for these trades to happen?
Yeah, way more fluid, right? Because you'll find a guy that you like, somebody else likes, anything like that. And then suddenly they're, on your roster, they're gone. 3s, 4s, like all these late round picks are great for facilitating these things. As you start to get into the more appropriate players, those big boom busts, that's when you get the first and seconds involved.
Mm-hmm.
But just 2 days ago, I sent off, Mike Gesicki for a 4th because somebody else wanted him and I didn't care. I got a free roster spot, and then I can go grab somebody else. Right?
Yeah, so good. And honestly, like that guy who got Gesicki for a 4th is probably like, dude, I just bought myself like 5 starts for a 4th round pick, like, and that's the other good thing about Dynasty in general is, you can have multiple people win a trade here, right? Yeah, and I want to touch on again too that more relevant players means more diverse builds, and we're going to dive more into that. But I want you guys to kind of keep that in the back of your mind here, and we'll talk about how that's a little bit more possible here at the end. But we are going to move on to our next fundamental here, which is to prioritize depth, and this kind of goes along with what we were just saying, right? These boom bust profiles, usually these guys are only going to enter your flex on your roster in a lineup league when somebody's on a bye or something like that, right? It's just like, oh, I don't really feel safe, starting this guy, but AJ Brown's on bye and I really, really need a starter. Maybe this guy can boom and get me 15 points. Those kind of pieces in a best ball league are extremely valuable. And we want that depth built around them so that we have more opportunities for these guys to enter a lineup. If I have 5 profiles that are the exact same, like Jameson Williams, Jordan Addison, Alec Pierce, whose profiles has changed, but he was like that last year. You know, you can even throw like a Ryan Flournoy in there. All of a sudden, I'm overlapping these sine waves like you're talking about, right? I have multiple times where these guys are going to boom, and I'm stacking them all together so that line is always at the top. One of those guys or 2 of those guys, if I'm lucky, are going to be entering my lineup. So having that depth of all these players that can have the potential to get into your lineup is so important, right? So do you think that this is true, and like how are you knowing that you're a contender in a best ball league when it's not just enough to have strong starters like you would in a lineup league? Is there kind of anything that you're looking for when you're getting into a contending position?
Yeah, when you got to look at your starting requirements, right? And you go, okay, I've got, say I've got 11 starters, I've got 12 starters. Then I look at my bench. You basically want to have double the number of starting positions available. So if you've got, super flex, you want to have like 3-4 quarterbacks. If you've got, start 2 running backs, you want at least 4, right? That are going to be able to get in there. If you've got start 3 wide receivers, you're looking at 6. Mm-hmm. And then when you start thinking about flexes, that's when, because your flex can be made up by anybody, that's where you get some wiggle room, some play time, where you can say, okay, I think I like this, I got to like this. We got a tight end premium. Maybe I can kind of put things into there on that side. And that's where you get a lot of that free area to roam in your roster setup there.
Yeah, no, that's so good. You nailed it on the head, right? Is trying to double the number of starting positions that you're required to start each week with someone who can reliably enter your lineup. And now we can balance that out, right? Like we were saying, we're embracing the variance and kind of taking that boom bust player with a more safe floor player. Like those 2 things go hand in hand, and making sure like you may not see like a Jameson Williams as like a reliable starter type, but in a best ball league, I would count him as someone who's reliably entering my lineup, because he's probably getting in there maybe 7 or 8 times a season. And that's good enough for me to count on this guy to get in there. So I think one thing that's kind of a result of us prioritizing depth and making sure that we have more players on our lineup that can enter into our roster any given week versus, trying to consolidate and get into those hammers and have those Jamar Chases and, Devon Achane and those type of players. I think a result of that is like studs are kind of diluted in value. They're a lot harder to move in best ball leagues. People are very savvy to knowing depth is king. And when their values are so high, like think about trying to trade for a Bijan Robinson in a lineup league. The amount of assets you have to give up to get him is astronomical. There's not one asset you can give up to go get Bijan Robinson. And if there is, it's another player like Bijan Robinson, like a Jamar Chase or like a Josh Allen, right? So a lot of times when you're trying to attain these guys in a lineup league, you're giving up multiple assets to go get them. Well, when we think about best ball dynasty and we're talking about prioritizing depth, if I'm giving up multiple assets to go get one asset, that seems like the exact opposite of what we're telling you. And that's the truth in the case of what we're seeing here. So because of this, Bijan Robinson, Jamar Chase, all these guys are diluted in value just because the market isn't quite there for them. People don't want to go and pay multiple assets to get him. And so they're a little bit harder to move or to roster in that case. Like when you have them, just know they're on your team and you need to build around them because you're probably not going to get fair market value for them and what you think is fair market value for them. So when you're building a best ball dynasty roster, are you seeking these guys out and say like a startup or something like that? Or do you have a different strategy in mind here?
So yes and no, right? Love a good stud, especially at tight end, because then you don't have to worry about it as much, right? Because those things are all over the place. But the key is really building your roster around where you have those studs and where you need to make up for that in volume. So if I've got a couple of stud running backs, then I'm going to make up for wide receiver with depth, and I'm going to have more of them. If I've got, kind of a late round QB thing going on, then I'm going to need a bunch of those, right? Because I don't have that stud. So you can kind of make up for your high end players with depth. I think Koopa did a study, figured out the number of different players it would take to replace a high end one. It's there. You can do it on your team. You just can't do it everywhere. So it becomes important to figure out where you're going to make those bets and say, I'm going to have some studs here, and I'm going to kind of dilute the rest of the way.
Yeah, no, that's so key. And you probably are hearing us allude here so often to the roster build and the construction of it. And we haven't even hit our number 5 fundamental here, which is roster construction, you guys. So I'm just gonna give you a little preview, or I guess that's more like a spoiler, I guess. But it is so crucial here, and this is why I love Best Ball Dynasty so much, is because there are so many different ways to construct a team, right? Like John's saying, having reliable but also high-end ceiling outcomes on your roster allows you to dedicate less of your roster space to that position. And so you can kind of devote the rest of your roster space to make up for those shortcomings on your roster. So because of this, tier downs are king in Best Ball Best Ball Dynasty. They're also pretty hard to come by. But you can get them done in season. I found a lot of times, especially in very shallow leagues. I play in a Best Ball league where we only roster 24 players, and we still have to start, I think, 10 or 11. So in that league, the waivers are super fruitful. But because your roster is so strong, if you're rebuilding, you can get some ridiculous trades done. Like I think I traded like Dallas Goedert, Jacoby Brissett, and I don't know, maybe like Jameson Williams. I traded those 3 players for like a first and Malik Neighbors last year to a contending team. Malik Neighbors was useless to them. He wasn't playing, and the first was to make up for all the other production. Ridiculous stuff like that, guys, that never gets done in a lineup league. You can get done in Best Ball leagues just because you need to prioritize depth, and tear downs are king. All right, we're going to take a quick break here, and then we're going to get back into our next Best Ball fundamental. Oh, right. Welcome back. John, when people tell you, oh, I want to play in a Best Ball Dynasty league because it's such a grind having to set my lineup every week. It feels like it'd be really nice to just have it set for me. What would you tell that person? It's like, Best Ball Dynasty is for me because I don't want to set my lineup. I don't want to work that hard.
It's true. I mean, I don't want to set my lineup, so I can't blame them. But you set your lineup, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, depending on what time of year it is. Get a Thursday game in there, Friday games. I think we had a Tuesday, whatever these days are that they're playing the games, right? You basically have to make sure that you got your lineup, you got your early games in the right places. It's a pain. I get it. But just because we're in best ball now doesn't mean that you don't have to pay attention, right? You still got to go make your trades. You still got to grind waivers. You got to check your league rules, see if players lock after they've played. If not, you can kind of go exploit that edge, drop them after a game, pick up somebody else. You get more shots at the target there, trying to get those points by just dropping the early player, picking up somebody who's playing on Sunday, drop somebody from Sunday, pick up somebody from Monday. You can really grind and get some edge on that.
Yeah. Stay on that grind is what we're calling this third Dynasty fundamental here. I think people do have that kind of connotation of a best ball league, is that it's probably going to be a lot less work. And that's probably true if you're rebuilding. You can probably maybe, slack off a little bit. You can kind of just roster these players who aren't scoring very many points, they're backups, and when they do get into relevancy, you trade them away. But if you're contending, this is very much a week to week game. You're looking at buying starts. You're looking at, like we were just saying, trading a fourth to get Mike Gesicki, because Mike Gesicki has a good matchup this week. And I feel like I could use another shot at a tight end here because I'm going up against Brock Bowers this week. And so I need to make sure that I have somebody that can, give me another opportunity to match that production there. You're also trying to find snaps off of waivers. And yes, I literally mean snaps. When I'm in a best ball league and I'm on waivers, I go and I sort by snap percentage. And if that guy has like a 30, 40% snap percentage, guess what? If I got room on my roster, he's making it on my team. Another thing that I think is like flies under the radar with best ball leagues is you need to manage injuries, because it's not like a lineup league. There are no IR spots in a best ball league. So you can't just go stash them, go pick up another player. An injury on a contending squad it kills you, because now you have to hold a roster spot for this guy who's not scoring you any points, and it's one less opportunity for you to get him. Plus, you're down a player who's usually a reliable starter for you. So a lot of times, that's why you can get Malik Neighbors for crazy, ridiculous prices last year, like I was just talking about. I would say it's, to put it in a term that I know, is it's not laissez-faire. Like the more engaged you are in your best ball dynasty league, the greater edge you're going to have. Churning the bottom of your roster with waivers is so important. Like we said, just trying to find snaps, trying to get ahead of people who are looking at targets per route run. I'm constantly monitoring that. If there's anybody who's getting these targets, I want them on my team, because that means opportunities for points. And again, like we were talking about previously with prioritizing depth, this just enables a livelier market. Late round picks and fab matter so much more, because you can trade fourths for players that don't normally matter. Like you wouldn't even think about it. So staying on that grind is just another way here that it changes from a lineup league. I would say you work harder in a best ball dynasty league. Do you think that's fair to say?
For sure. And also, it keeps the rebuilders engaged, because they're sitting there constantly trying to get points off their roster. Mm-hmm. And so they're buying those injured players. They're taking up spots, collecting those zeros so that they don't have to worry about it, and getting that value for later. So if I'm a rebuilder in a best ball dynasty league, I'm buying those injured guys every single time, right? That's an opportunity to buy studs when you can't normally buy studs, because they're devalued to the contenders, and they're great for me.
Yeah, no, well said. So well said. And honestly too, like that just goes into enabling a market too, right? Like you have more of a symbiotic relationship between contenders and rebuilders, more so than you would in a lineup league, because you can't just stash these guys away and like they, hide them on the back of your roster. No, you need those roster spots. Those are more important than holding that player, right? So like it just, again, that's why I love Best Ball Dynasty, just because the trades are there, and that's probably my favorite part about Dynasty. I don't know, do you like trading, John?
Absolutely. I gotta get those trades in, right?
That's right.
Especially with those lovely tools from Keegan you mentioned earlier, right?
Hey, man.
He's staying on that grind. He is building that tool out, right? Sending those offers. That tool's awesome.
It is so awesome. Yeah. And if you don't know by now, you should know by now. OTCFFB.com. # not a sponsor. Could be a sponsor. You guys let me know. All right, let's move on to our fourth Dynasty Best Ball fundamental here. And we're going to call it 0 snaps equals 0 points. And I changed it. I had it earlier, calling it the duality of zeros. But I kind of wanted this to be a little bit more standalone, and I felt like duality of zeros was a little bit vague. If someone was to look at this, they wouldn't maybe know exactly what that meant, and we wouldn't have 5 or 6 minutes here to talk about it. So I wanted to change it to be a little more punchy. We're calling it 0 snaps, 0 points, because that's essentially what this comes down to, is zeros, meaning players who have no chance at production unless promoted to a starting role, like backup running backs or backup quarterbacks. They are actively hurting your lineup and your weekly scores. Sometimes that's a good thing. Like we were just talking about, John was saying these rebuilders want that so that they can get a better pick going into the future years. However, for contenders, those are actively hurting your weekly lineup. They're stealing an opportunity for points. So there's this duality of zeros here where they're good and they're bad, which we've talked around and through here so many different ways. But it needs to be emphasized because this is the crux of everything, right? Is understanding that each roster spot is another chance for you to win your week. It doesn't even matter the name in that roster spot. You literally, you don't have to assign names to anybody in this. You can just look at stats and snaps and targets, and you just want them in there because they might go off for 5 catches, 75 yards, and a touchdown. And all of a sudden, you have 16 points in your flex because you picked a guy up off of waivers here. It is so clutch here. So that whole thing here, holding those zeros on a contending squad, I said you really want to avoid these zeros. But you push back a little bit on that, John, right? What did you have to say about this?
Yeah, so I think here's where you got to be intentional, right? Zeros can be okay as long as you don't have too many of them. You don't want to necessarily have that like third string backup QB or something. You don't want that running back that's not really going to do anything because he's sitting there and he'll come in because he's the handcuff, right? You want those guys with jobs. So you can balance it out as long as when you've done your rookie draft, a lot of those guys are coming in. They're going to be zeros off the bat. So you got to plan, have that space for them, and then understand that depending on your depth, this may or may not be a good thing for you to have, right? Maybe you want to trade out of that spot, move back, move forward, trade up in your drafts, right? For me, if I'm looking at a rookie draft and I see like, hey, this is a shallow league, and I know I don't have a ton of bench space because I was trading back already. I was already doing that tear down. Now I'm going to have to do some consolidation, right? So I find that it ebbs and flows. And over time, you do your tear downs, and then suddenly your roster's full of these players, and like, I got to do something, right? Otherwise, these thirds and fourths, where are they going to go? They need space. So that's when you got to start trading up. You just start consolidating, and you start doing the tier ups. And so this is kind of that league economy where you've got this whole ecosystem of people going up, going down. You got rebuilders going, and this is that really live trade market, which I really like in best ball.
Yeah, no, so true. Yeah, being selective with the zeros, like you're saying, not any QB on a 2 deep is not necessarily as viable as a strategy here as it would be in like a lineup league. I wouldn't say you could just apply that to any sort of roster construction in a Dynasty Bestball. There's a time for it, like we're saying, maybe you're rebuilding or something like that. Or maybe you're thin at running your quarterbacks, but they're both studs, and you want to dedicate one spot to the backup running back for that quarterback. So that way, if they get hurt, you still have another running back. That'd be a time where I would say, that might be a good time to be selective in rostering a zero. If your build allows for it, it's okay to do it. You just have to be intentional with it, like John is saying. Well said, man. Well said. Any other thing you want to say here on the 0 points before we move on?
Yeah, this is a place where I don't mind having the direct backup occasionally, right? If it's one of those high-end sets where they're going to fill in and get that full workload. What I don't want is when there's an ambiguous backfield where I don't want to carry like 4 guys to end up with like one spot. That's not efficient for me. But if I know that CMC's got a backup and he is the guy when CMC goes down, that I don't mind as much because I'm going to get that same production or 80% or whatever it is for that couple of games, right? Or I'll pick them up off waivers, trade for them, whatever needs to happen. But that's where I don't mind it as much and where I'm being selective about who to put in there. I think you said it perfectly with the QBs, right? Throw a Carson back in there or something if you've got like 2 stud QBs, so you don't need to deal with him until later.
Yeah. I'll tell you something that I never had actually thought about until I was in this situation. It was a 10-team best ball dynasty startup last year. I drafted very heavy into a contending build. The league puts a premium on running backs, especially pass catching running backs. They get an extra 0.5 point per reception. On top of that, they get a first down bonus. So I knew I wanted to lean heavily into running backs. And I traded back. I had all my picks consolidated into like rounds 4 through 7. Then I immediately, went Christian McCaffrey. I think I got Devon Achane in like the back of the second. I have Derrick Henry on that squad. Joe Mixon ended up being on that squad. Jaylen Warren. I was so heavily indexed into these running backs early on that to make the build work, I had to draft older receivers that were still producing at a high level. So guys like Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill ended up on that squad. I had Terry McLaurin, all these guys, Mike Evans, all these guys in the later back half of the early rounds in a startup draft. And what I didn't account for going into this build was now this year, some of them lost jobs. Some of them are still injured. So I have probably 5 or 6 roster spots dedicated to zeros. I can't, and they're not bad enough to where I should be able to drop them either. I was over indexed into one type of asset, and now I'm paying the price for that because they've turned into zeros, right? So that's something that I didn't expect in this startup was these guys all aging out at the same time and being over indexed into this. And it's just wisdom that I wanted to share with you guys, and being intentional with the zeros, but also projecting when they're going to turn into zeros. And if they get there, how do you manage that? Do you have the resources to kind of build around that?
Keep an eye on those age cliffs, understand how old and each kind of area of your roster is, and then keep an eye on that compared to your draft capital. So I'm assuming, this is coming out of a startup. You do a bunch of trade ups, move up and get some players, or you have some of your future picks still there. Because if your roster's that old, you need those future picks for later. Fill those holes when there are injuries, when they're out, and also just bring in some young blood when you're turning the page to 2027, 28, and so on.
Luckily, I did. I was able, from trading back so many times, I had 2 extra first banked. So I had 3 firsts this year. I think I traded 2 of them away in season last year to get Justin Jefferson, which just felt like an absolute steal. So I was able to kind of stop the landslide, but I still don't know what to do with all these zeros on the back. I'm kind of just waiting out this season. I don't have to do anything with them right now. Maybe some of them get jobs, maybe not, but if they don't, then I feel okay dropping them at that point. But being intentional with your zeros is the lesson here. 0 snaps equals 0 points. All right, let's get on to the next one. Probably the most important here of all of them. Roster construction above all. We've talked about it already, or I guess talked around it already in many ways. But I think you said it best, man. You said it in the Discord when it was Curdy talking about how he's doing his first best ball league. You gave him some great advice, consolidated, I think, into 10 different items here. But this one stood out to me the most, man. And I want you to kind of share it with the listeners here.
Yeah. So the way I started it was think GM, not coach. So in this case, you're building a roster. You're getting this team together. You're not putting in what the plays are. You're not setting your lineup. You're not figuring out who's going to be on the field doing whatever needs to happen. You're taking this set of guys, bringing it with you each week and saying, this is my team. These are the guys that are going to score my points, and then rolling with it.
Yeah, it's so important, right? Like you said, a coach would choose who to start every week and what plays to call. Whereas a GM is worried about the chemistry of the team and the profiles that he's selecting to give to the coach so that they can have an important, or I guess a synergized roster, right? So in that kind of sense, when we're thinking GM, you need to plan your roster around these positional allocations. Just like in an NFL organization, you don't necessarily see a team with 7 QBs, right? And why is that? Well, they're not going to need them all. just like in a best ball league, like you want to allocate the number of positions you need for that, right? And maybe that's 4 to 5 quarterbacks. I think that's probably pretty typical for a best ball league. You want at least 3. But if you can have 5 starting quarterbacks on your team, you're doing it right. Because we all know any quarterback can have a down week and any quarterback can have an up week. So having those bites at the apple to enter the roster is good. Similarly, you need a plan for running backs, right? Maybe you want 6 to 7 of them. Or maybe you have a Bijan Robinson, you have a Jonathan Taylor, and let's say somebody like Quinshon Judkins. You have 3 stud running backs that can enter your lineup every week. Maybe you don't need another 5 running backs in that team. Maybe you only need 2 or 3, and you have a weakness at wide receivers that you want to fill more in. So you really want to plan your positional allocations here. Think ahead for how your team should look. What assets do you have? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? How are you going to dedicate these roster spot allocations accordingly based on those strengths and weaknesses? And I think
you look at your...
Oh, I'm sorry, John. Go ahead.
When you look at your league size, your roster requirements, and that's going to come into play here too. Because if you've got a 10-team league, a 12-team league, 14, 16, whatever it happens to be, it's different numbers of rostered players. Yeah. And then your depth of your benches as well. So there are players that are going to be available if you're in a 10 by 10, right? With like a 26-man roster. There's going to be a ton more available to you on waivers. You don't need to roster the same way.
Right.
If you're 12 by 12, if you've got 32-man rosters, those waivers are going to be a lot more barren. So you have to be kind of intentional about where you roster things as well. Yeah,
no, so crucial there is to consider not only the roster settings, but also the scoring settings too, I think is another way to do it, right? I mean, if you're playing in a tight end premium, which I think this is actually like an interesting topic of discussion that we're going to get into when we get into the roster construction of tight ends. We're going to dedicate a whole episode to it. But with these tight ends and the new personnel trend that we have in the NFL, we're going to see a lot more of them entering our flex. Maybe we can build a little bit slimmer at wide receiver and running backs because of that, and take more shots at these tight ends, especially, well, really only in tight end premium leagues here, where you're going to see them become more and more. I took a look at the war graphs over the last few years and compared them side by side. The gap between tight ends and wide receiver is getting smaller and smaller as the years go on. And I kind of expect that trend to continue at least for one more year here. So not only do you need to know your total roster size, like John is saying, how to allocate them, and the scoring settings that go into it. I think the overall theme here is that we want to optimize our roster spots for synergy, right? You don't want like 3 stud quarterbacks and then rostering, assuming Superflex, by the way, which is really, if you're not playing Superflex, I don't know. Maybe it's not for you, but that is the new vanilla for me. If you have 3 stud quarterbacks, you shouldn't be rostering another 5 quarterbacks that are good profiles, but they don't have a starting job, right? Like a Michael Penix or like a JJ McCarthy or a Carson Beck, like we're talking about, right? Like that's not a synergized roster at that point. You're wasting roster spots on quarterbacks because you already have 3 stud QBs. Between those guys, they're going to fill those quarterback starts more than enough for you. What's another way you would say that you could synergize a roster here?
So if I'm thinking about it, and to stick with QBs for a second, you can do, if you've got your Penix and your Tua's over there now, right? And it looks like it's filling that spot because now you've got that roster spot secured. Whoever the starter is, you've got it. But now you're eating up 2 spots. If you're on one of those more shallow leagues, do you really want to dedicate those 2 spots for one position? Not really. That's a great time. You can package them up together, send them somewhere else. Or if you look around the league and go, oh, I had Tua, but now he's over there, go find the Penix manager, send him that way, right? You've now found some synergy with that other team, with that manager. You're able to ping them across. If you start to look at your running backs, things like that, you want to kind of mix profiles that, or even with wide receivers, mix those profiles like we talked about earlier. The consistency is along with the spike weeks, right? Get things that work together well. For, we can get into it on a running back show, but for the running backs, I prefer get those guys with jobs, get those starters, followed by some of those like timeshare guys, the pass catching running backs, the people that are going to help you out in a PPR league. The backups, I don't want to spend a ton of time there because they're going to be those zeros. So got to be intentional.
Yeah, very intentional, right? I think balancing not only the ceiling and the floor between the positions, but also balancing the strength and the weaknesses of your roster with studs and volume, right? I think that's probably like the overall thing that we're trying to convey here is being intentional with every single roster spot, having a plan that makes sense and works together for one common goal. One last thing I think we should mention about roster construction is not only allocating, roster spots to certain positions, like I want 4 roster spots for quarterbacks. I want 7 roster spots for running backs and 9 roster spots for wide receivers. You should also assign some roster spots to be free, to where you can churn those spots in and out of the waivers, right? Having the flexibility to drop somebody and go and pick somebody else up off of the waivers is so crucial in a best ball league. You don't want to roster these guys that are developmental prospects that aren't going to give you starts, but you also don't want to drop them, right? Because you're like, he might break out, right? Those are the kind of guys that I'm not really looking to get, and I'd rather have somebody like Olamide Zaccheaus. That sounds gross, right? But it's like, dude got snaps last year. Dude got targets, right? Like, that was pretty easy to see that he was going to be somebody that could enter my flex for me last year. And so having him on there makes it to where, okay, cool. As long as he's still producing, you got a roster spot. As soon as he's not producing, he gone. So it's like embracing that variance from a week to week nature allows you to kind of be more free with how many ever roster spots you dedicate to churning it. Is there any more that we should say on kind of that part of it?
Yeah, I mean that's where those churn comes into play. Is who was the running back on Washington last year that was
Right.
getting tons of volume catches? Was it Jeremy McNichols, right?
Yeah.
So perfect example of this, right? If you've got that roster spot, you can pick him up, throw him in there for a couple of weeks, and then as soon as you are done with him, back he goes, right?
Mhm.
Hits a bye or something, gets injured, doesn't matter anymore, right? He's not one of those guys that you have to care about because they have no value, because they're waiver guys, right? If you see Flournoy's out there and you see CD gets an ankle injury or something, go grab Flournoy, throw him in there. CD's back healthy, toss him back,
Mhm.
right? Big deal.
Yeah, no big deal at all. And I think you need to design for that, right? Because I think that's such a crucial point of being competitive. And so being able to allocate some spots to that gives you the flexibility and the ability to execute that kind of strategy here, which makes it easier. And I'd also say too, in shallower leagues, it's almost easier to do because you can get better production on the waiver wire because there's better players on the waiver wire. And that one is almost like a redraft league when you play in those ones, right? Like you're just trying to choose matchups at that point. So there's all sorts of good production. There may be like 10 guys on waivers that are going to be projected at 6 or 7 points. And yeah, I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but in a best ball league, like, I'm down. I'm down with those projections because they can boom and get yourself like 10 or 12. But now you need to decide which one of these guys is the best one to roster for that week, because you're not cutting an Olamide Zacchaeus or a Jeremy McNichols. You're probably cutting somebody more like a Rico Dowdle, or maybe like who would be a Rashad White, maybe like somebody like that who should be rostered, but you need to make that tough decision. Okay, like he's not going to give me the start that I need this week, but I think this guy's got a better chance to do it. So again, just dedicating those roster spots so that you can execute the strategy, whether it's a shallow league or a deep league. It's so important to have that ability for a contending team, and even for a rebuilding team too, right?
On the rebuilds, honestly, you have to be careful about how far you strip things down because it's best ball, because everyone is kind of churning so much. It's really hard to dig out of those holes depending on how far down you go. Because when you are trying to strip it down and minimize your points, you may overdo it. I've seen people with a tendency to go too far, and then they end up in this 3, 4, 5 multi-year rebuild because they went too far and they can't get back out of it because they're drafting rookies, right? And so they need to figure out how to get and do those tear downs off and sell the rookie picks to get those productive vets that are still young enough to align with their timeline. So if you do want to rebuild, try to find that happy medium between no points and some reasonable amount of points. That's where you got to get those injured players.
Yeah.
Get those, backup QBs, backup running backs, because as soon as the guy in front of them goes down, you can sell him off with taking minimal points on and maximizing your return.
Yeah. So wise. I love that. Yeah. You can definitely take a rebuild too far. All right. Do you think there's anything more we should say about roster construction here before we kind of wrap this up?
I'd say just one note to the commissioners out there, to the people that are going to start any of these best ball leagues, is to keep that size in mind when you are designing it. So if you're thinking about a shallow league, then if you go too shallow, you might hurt your trade activity because of the available players on waivers. If you go too deep, then you're going to hurt your waiver activity because you don't have anyone out there, and everyone's going to be having to trade, right? Just again, everything I say is be intentional with what you're doing.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. What would you say is like a healthy total roster spot here for someone who's new and doesn't have that kind of foresight to think all that through?
The way I tend to think about it, depending on, what your goal is, if you're trying to have a healthy league, a little bit of depth, things like that, I'd say double the roster requirements plus something in the 4 to 6 range. So if you're looking at like a 12 by 11, right? Double that 11 starters, you got 22. Add 4, you're sitting at 26. That's kind of the low end, right? And so if you're on a deeper league, maybe more of a 12 by 12, something like that, now you've got 12 starters, double it, you're at 24. Add 6, you're sitting at 30, right? And that's a good, healthy spot. As you start to go deeper, then you kind of start to dry up on waivers.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Okay. That was great, man. Thank you for coming on. I really appreciate all your wisdom here, John. You're great, bud.
Thanks for having me, J-Mac. It's a pleasure. Great talking to you.
Yeah, man, absolutely. That's the one I wanted. There we go. Go ahead and throw your glasses on. We're going to do a little bit of neuralizer for everybody. Nobody saw that. Stay tuned with us, guys. We got more roster construction coming up for you. You can look for how we're going to build specifically for, I think, QBs and tight ends are next. John, you mentioned Koopa. I did line him up as a guest. He's going to be a great resource for everybody to hear on. So you can stay tuned and be looking forward to that. Other than that, John, it was a pleasure, man. Thanks for coming on.
My pleasure.
Everybody else, hit that like button, subscribe, do what you can to share the podcast, leave a comment. We'll be back with Jose next week. We missed you, buddy. Talk to you guys later. Peace.